Good afternoon to all of our guests and staff. At this time, if we can all go ahead and lead with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Lori, if we can have the roll call for today's October 4th, Thursday meeting.
Certainly. Commissioner Enriquez? Commissioner Marilis?
Here.
Commissioner Mena?
Present.
And Ishan Butt, our youth commissioner?
Here.
Okay. And I understand that Commissioner Okello is running a little bit late.
Yes, that's
But
correct.
he'll be here. Okay.
I do see that we have on our agenda regarding the Coastside and Dog with San Mateo County. It's on our agenda. If we have Christine Corwin, who can speak today.
Well, these are for things that are not on the agenda, I guess. Public comment for not the dogs would be now. Do we have any for not?
Do we?
Public comment for anything that's not dogs? I guess we don't.
Okay.
Okay.
If at this time there are no public comments, we will move into the presentations and on to agenda 4 point, number 4, 4.1, presentations by the Friends of Huddart and Wonderlicks Parks. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Jill Daly. I'm the current board president of the Friends of Huddart Wonderlick Park. Kim Teppo is here with me. She's our director of programs. So we just wanted to give you a little overview of what's going on in these two parks and our role in providing programming. So we're going to start out today with just a little video for you. And it'll give you sort of a visual snapshot of what we do. So just a couple minutes. It's coming on right now. So that was just sort of a historical picture, and actually, many of you know, Scott especially, that the Friends became involved in the parks over 20 years ago, providing very small programs for kids' nature education over in Huddart Park, and then we became involved with the Folger Stable Project, which was a historical renovation project completed in 2010. So since then, many programs have blossomed from the result of having that wonderful asset to operate these programs. So we'll just give you a little bit more depth of information as to what those programs are. So it is an organization that takes care of more than a stable. However, we do have $1 million endowment, which is meant to take care of any major repairs that the stable will require as it goes forward in its life, providing equestrian services as well as a place for public programming. So, since the video, we have provided more than 7,200 people in the county with programming, and that includes programming for adults and children. So, this is a huge accomplishment that we're very proud of. The nature hikes, which was where the Friends started, have resumed in a big way. So we provide nature education programs in Huddard Park for kindergarten through fourth grade. Many of these kids come from underprivileged schools. So we're very happy to be able to serve a community that generally wouldn't get out to the parks. And we're doing that by providing transportation and free tuition for these programs. So the Folger School Program is our next program. This is a joint program with the San Mateo County Historical Association. We've been doing this program since 2010, and over 1,200 kids are coming out for these programs on Wednesdays and Fridays. They learn about the history of the area and also get to meet a horse. So we're trying to incorporate history and horses in this program, and it does follow the curriculum guidelines for third and fourth grade. So the next thing we're doing is providing all kinds of youth programs, not only the Folger School Program, but the Huddard Hikes, and we're expanding that, which I'll talk about in a little while. So you can see the growth in those programs year to year. So hikes with friends. We've become aware that there are so many people who want to get out and do curated hikes. Some people are afraid to go out in nature without a guide. So we have found that we have a huge group of docents now that really want to do these kinds of hikes with people. So we're just sort of following the demand and are able to provide all kinds of hiking experiences. We're moving into some experiences that are also going into a health and wellness bent. So expanding these friends with the Friends RX approach, we realize that in our community it is an incredible asset to have these beautiful wilderness experiences to people that can only add to their health and wellness. It's free, it's available, so we'd like to be able to support that. So we're going in the direction of providing these parks for health and wellness of the community at large. So the equestrian part of this we cannot leave out. We have equestrians in the room today who will want me to mention this. It's a big part of the heritage of the park, and we offered this through the kids' field trip. They all meet a horse, and as many of you know, there's a thriving equestrian program going on at the park through Chaparral Corporation. The lease is with the county, so that's available for the public too. So it's an area that we want to support and promote for the community. The Carriage House, when the county accepted our offer to renovate the stable, they said to us, what will you do there for the public at large? And so it was important for us to come up with community programs that everyone could enjoy, even if they didn't have a horse. So we developed a museum inside the carriage room, and we receive over hundreds and hundreds of visitors per month there. So it's very busy. It's open from 10 to 4 on Saturdays. We're hoping with some more docents that we can expand that to Sundays, but it's a very popular activity as part of people's hiking experience. They have a hike and then visit the museum. Exhibit space. What we have done to further the adult part of the programming that we offer is to have frequently changing exhibits. And our recent one is one that discovers the life of the early loggers in the 1850s. And we call this a rough and perilous life. So it examines what it was really like for these loggers in the early days. You can see Supervisor Don Horsley was at one of our speaking events when we opened up this museum exhibit. So if you haven't come, please do. It's quite a wonderful little exhibit, I have to say. Then we're doing a speaker series. Again, another way to invite the community in to enjoy this wonderful historical asset. You can see that we set up theater style in the barn aisle is actually what that picture on the right is. And then we've also utilized the carriage house for an art display. So this is an interesting focus. We try to incorporate subjects of the natural environment, history, and we're going to do an equestrian themed event as well. There's one coming up on October
21st.
about.
We're bringing in an ornithologist who's going to talk to us about owls and ornithology in general. And we're working on trying to get a live owl to come out to be part of the demo, which would be a
If
lot of
anyone
fun.
knows an owl. The other events we're doing is we're going to do a children's, a big family-free event for the holidays. And we have just had our fundraising event, which is the Big Bad Barn Dance. So another way that we're using the stable for the community. And this is just a graphic that you can see the impact that we're trying to achieve here with over 7,000 community members coming to our programs, number of kids on hikes, over 1,000. It's 1,394 volunteer hours. I know Carla collects this data, so we're proud of the fact that that actually computes to a lot of money if we were to charge or to pay for those wonderful hours. The museum visitors, over 4,000. And now we're starting to do some special programs with community groups like, I don't know if you're familiar with Life Moves. It's a Families in Transition. They've been coming out for their summer programs. And again, we're also doing hikes with other health groups like Envision, Vista Center for the Blind. So these are people that we're hoping to serve and do more of that. So that completes our presentation. A little thank you from the Friends. Any questions or comments?
I'd just like to say to the chair, thank you very much, not just for the presentation, but for volunteering. The Parks Department really couldn't do without all of its great volunteers to raise money and to offer access to the parks to other groups, especially underprivileged kids. That's really great. Love to hear that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
We have to say we've had a great relationship with the county, and we couldn't do it without them either. So County Parks has been wonderful for us too. So really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ladies, what a very special presentation that you've put forward, and we are glad that you even came this afternoon and brought forth and shared all of what you had. And I'm very happy that many people from within San Mateo County and within the counties that the cities that you represent are going to benefit from this with the holidays, coming up in November and December. And, what can I say? This is a wonderful opportunity, and I hope that we as commissioners and the community can attend the festivities in December, and I think this is great. I wish all of you the very best and continued success.
Thank you.
To the chair. Well, in addition to what Commissioner Neal, thanking you for all the things that you did to the parks. Now, I need to know the history on the stable, the Folger stable.
It was built by
When is that built? Built in what year?
1905 by James Folger.
I understood that mostly, is that immigrant from China? Most of the
The
laborers.
workers There was a property owner before Folger, Simon Jones, who employed many of the workers that were coming off the railroad project. And he farmed the property. And so many of those Chinese workers, of course, were being excluded with the Chinese Exclusion Act at the time. So he was a big supporter of Chinese laborers and even testified in San Francisco on their behalf. And so those stone walls that are running throughout Wunderlich, if you've been there, you know, those were built by those Chinese laborers. So that would have preceded Folger, the 1860s
Yeah, we were
and
there at least
70s.
3 years ago when we were invited by the park staff for
Yeah.
the unveiling of that Folger. And touring on the outside, the wall, there's a very historical concrete stone. What's the name of that stone?
We think it was probably sandstone that was, you know, kind of taken from the hillsides. I'm not sure exactly, but we actually have a geologist that's going to come and talk to our docents. So maybe we'll find out a little bit more about those. But they're very durable. They've stood since the 1870s, so they're standing up strong. Welcome.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments in regards? We are going to now move over to action item 5.1, review and approve the minutes of August 2nd meeting, 2018 Park and Recreation meeting. Do I have any commissioners here like to approve the meetings from the August 2nd minutes?
I move we approve the minutes from August 2nd.
Second. Okay, members, the August 2nd meeting motion has been made and commissioners have approved and second.
We haven't taken a vote.
Can we take a vote on the passing of the August 2nd meeting? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the August 2nd minutes meeting passes. On the agenda on action item 5.2 is a twofold. It's a recommendation by the Parks Department to receive and accept that the proposed amendment to the county ordinance governing dog recreation within San Mateo County parks and recreation areas. And two, the Parks Department would like the Park and Recreation Commission to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to adopt the proposed amendment to the county ordinance governing dog recreation within San Mateo County parks and recreation.
Vice Chair Mena, I would like to introduce to you Deputy Parks Director Nicholas Calderon. He will be presenting this item to your commission. I want to put some context around this. This is the first step in terms of implementing the Dogs Committee's recommendations. So, Mr. Calderon?
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And good evening, honorable commissioners. As Director Jensen said, my name is Nicholas Calderon. And today we're here to present to you on the proposed amendment to the county ordinance governing dog recreation in county parks and recreation areas. And as the commission may recall, in 2016, the Dog Management Committee was formed. And the committee was formed to advise the commission on guidelines regarding departmental policies on how dog recreation should or could be allowed in county parks and recreation areas. And while the Dog Management Committee developed a series of policies or guidelines that were adopted by the commission, at the time it was also identified that there was a need to amend the county ordinance. Reason being, currently the county's ordinance says no dogs allowed in county parks or recreation areas. Further, a violation of the ordinance is a misdemeanor offense on your first violation. And because this is the policy, and then further, there's no management of the individuals who are bringing dogs into parks or recreation areas, because this ordinance is not in line with the county's current practice of how we manage our parks, it was really needed to change the ordinance so that or amend the ordinance so our rangers have the necessary enforcement ability to not just ensure that all users have the ability to enjoy our parks, but also that we're able to be good stewards of the land and protect our natural resources. As I stated, the existing practice of the department is we allow dogs at a series of parks and trails. So Quarry Park is open to dogs. The Bay Trail through Coyote Point, Murata East and West on the coast side, and as well as the Coastal Trail are all accessible to dogs and their owners. And the reason this is because these properties were accessible to individuals recreating with their dogs prior to the county's ownership of these properties. Or in the case of the Coastal Trail and the Bay Trail, these are regional trails that connect to other segments owned and managed by other agencies. And there's a general practice that these trails will be accessible to dogs. And so to be in line with that and our regional partners, we allow the Coastal Trail segments in our parks and the Bay Trail through Coyote Point to be accessible. In order to bring the ordinance and the practice, in order to make them consistent, the department is proposing a series of amendments to the county's ordinance. The first amendment is simply stating that dogs are granted access to areas specifically designated and signed so. So currently, the parks and the trails mentioned on the prior slide have appropriate signage, and appropriate signage would be increased so we could raise awareness and go through an education phase, and those would be accessible. Also, it's important that we're able to work with the public so that they understand the rules, but owners of dogs are responsible for the manner in which their dogs behave, and so it's important that we include the following provisions in the ordinance, which includes that all dogs must be leashed, and that leash cannot exceed 6 feet. Dogs must stay on the trails, and that is to protect the natural resources that are adjacent to the trails. Our parks have sensitive habitat and protected species, and we have a responsibility to protect those, and we want to make sure that we're doing that. The dog must be walked by an individual who can control the dog. And individuals with dogs must always pick up after their dog and dispose of the waste in an appropriate manner. We've probably all been to parks where people will either leave the dog waste on the trail, or they'll pick it up, put it in a bag, and then leave the bag off to the side. Neither of those are an appropriate action or allow us to satisfy our mission for preserving these parks. Additionally, the dog must be licensed appropriately, which is in accordance with county ordinance, and no individual would be allowed to bring more than 3 dogs in a park at a time, and that's because you have to be able to control your dogs, and if you have more than 3, we believe that, and we think that it would be pretty challenging to do so. If an individual was to violate the ordinance, there would be a series of penalties. I think the most important thing to point out is, as I hit on earlier, we're going to go through an education phase and an outreach phase, which means we would make sure that people are aware that we have changed the ordinance, that these are the what the new rules are, and that these are the penalties. So we would go through an education phase, and we would go into the implementation phase of that, which is on your first offense, it would be a $50 fine. On your second offense, it would be a $100 fine. And on your third offense, it would be a $300 fine. Now, if you receive a fourth offense or more within a 12-month period, it would be a $1,000 fine and a misdemeanor offense, which, as you'll recall from an earlier slide, as of right now, the way the ordinance is written, it's on your first offense, it's a misdemeanor offense. So, we're trying to really provide encouragement, incentives, and education, and make sure that we're being reasonable, respectful, but also firm in the way that we're managing our parks. Next steps would be, upon a recommendation from the Parks Commission, we would present the ordinance for adoption to the Board of Supervisors. The tentative schedule for that would be October 23rd would be the first read, and November 6th would be the second read. And then once this goes into effect, we would go through a data collection phase. It would be important that we're able to understand how many citations are being written, how often are rangers having to clean up after dogs, how many incidents are occurring because of this new policy. So it's important that we're able to collect that information. Additionally, we'll be bringing a pilot program to the commission later on, and that's going to be based on the guidelines that were adopted by the commission earlier, which was a recommendation by the Dog Management Committee. And the pilot program would go back through the Dog Management Committee, and we would engage with them for input on that and a better understanding as to what the desires and expectations and interests are for this pilot program. So the thought is that after we get the ordinance in place and we're able to collect data, we would be developing the pilot program. With that said, the recommendation before the commission today is to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to adopt the proposed ordinance, to adopt the proposed amendment to the county ordinance governing dog recreation within San Mateo County parks and recreation areas. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Yeah, I had some comments, but I thought, could I wait and give my comments after public comment so that I hear what the public has to say?
You
okay?
may. Typically, you would provide your comments now, but if you'd like to have an extended discussion afterwards, that's fine.
I can do it now.
Yeah.
I can do it now. I don't mind. I hate to get into the weeds here. If anybody has a copy of the ordinance that they want to go through, I wanted to kind of go over the actual ordinance. I was on the dog committee, and we worked on it for 2 years. So it's still kind of fresh in my mind. And thank you for getting this to us. It's really nice to move forward finally on this policy. And I realize this is the step that we need to go through. On page 4, it says domestic animals. It used to be that no domestic animals were allowed in the park, so this is a change to that. It says, except as expressly permitted pursuant to section blah blah, no dogs, cats, fowl, or other domestic animals shall be permitted to enter any county park either with or without a keeper. That's the new language, and I thought it kind of doesn't make sense, or it's redundant. It said except where permitted pursuant to section no dogs or cats. It could just say dogs are only allowed in certain areas. Dogs are only allowed where they're admitted. Anyway, I thought that was a little confusing, but minor. And then where most of the changes happen are on the last page. The first section, it says that dogs shall not be permitted in any recreation area unless it's posted. So right now, nothing's posted. And I think just about everything, every parking lot has a sign, every park entrance has a sign that says no dogs are allowed. So I think it's pretty well posted to the negative already. And if you present it to the public as if no dogs are allowed unless it's posted that they are, unless they're allowed, then every member of the public has to read this and know that they're not allowed. Even if there's no post where you go to a park, if it doesn't say no dogs, somebody might assume that they're allowed. And the way this is written is that they're not allowed unless it's specifically posted that they are allowed. So it's in the affirmative. But since most of our parks are already posted, no dogs are allowed, I think if you post the areas where you don't want dogs, that they're not allowed, and you post the areas where you do want dogs, that they are allowed, that would take care of everything. So you don't have to have the standing rule that if there's nothing. I mean, I don't think there will be no signs at parking lots or at entrances.
I think and Nicholas, feel free to jump in, but I think the intent is to make that the default in the ordinance so that the public knows to look at the signs.
Except I don't think that the public reads this, or the public would know. They would only know through our signs, I guess is what I'm saying. And it would be hard to go to the DA, for instance, and get a misdemeanor conviction for having a dog in the wrong place if it wasn't posted that you couldn't take the dog there.
Through the chair, Commissioner Merrilies, the intent of the department is to make sure that the appropriate trails and parks are adequately signed with what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So in the case of a trail or a park where dogs would be allowed, there would be signage stating so. And in the case where dogs would not be allowed, there would be the appropriate signage stating that as well.
I understand. It just puts the impetus on knowing the regulations to the public. But I think our posting is pretty good. And it will be better in the future as we put out signs that say dogs are allowed. So this is minor, but I just, I thought if you are going to get a conviction, we might want to put a no dog allowed in certain areas like Ross's Cove or Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. There already are plenty of signs there that say no dogs. But I think our signage is pretty good. About having dogs, I had to have a San Mateo County license. Does that mean dogs from out of the area can't come, like dogs from San Francisco?
So before I respond to that, I believe Director Jensen may have a comment. Oh, maybe
Through the chair, we can look at that language and say unlicensed dogs are not allowed.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah.
And if I may, through the chair, in terms of the question about the posting, what we're doing at this point is clarifying which parks the parks where dogs are allowed. So that's the change in the signing. Currently, dogs are not allowed anywhere, and that's what the signing throughout the parks currently is.
Right.
So this is the first step.
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, Pillar Point doesn't have any no dogs signs. But any case, we're going to get the signage down, and so this will not be an issue.
Exactly.
But I don't want every member of the public to have to carry this around.
And that
to
is
know.
not our intent.
Yeah.
Our intent is to have very clear signage and information
And I think-
available as to where dogs are allowed and where they are not.
I think we're good with signage generally. The most important change that I would suggest would be on the leash law. It says that dogs have to be on leash at all times. And I would like to put a little note in there that says, with the exception of designated off-leash areas. And we don't have any designated off-leash areas, but we hope to have some designated off-leash areas in the future. And I would hate to have to go back and review this every time we make a little change. I mean, certainly with the dog committee, the idea was to find areas where dogs would not do damage and that were accessible with parking lots and that are not too close to neighbors, to have a place where you could throw a Frisbee or a tennis ball. Because after all, we are taking away the right at this point. People have been throwing tennis balls for their dogs in places like the Pillar Point Bluffs, because that was pretty much not out of control, but just, I mean, before Parks Department took it on, for many years people went there and recreated with their dogs off leash. So we're putting the kibosh on that. But it would be nice before a ranger gives somebody a ticket, it would be nice if the ranger could tell somebody where to go. You know, oh, you can go over there to our off-leash area at Wicklow or at Quarry Park or something someday. I think definitely the intention is to do that in the future. So at this point, I would like to put something in the wording that shows that we'd like to do that so that we don't have to go back here again. So just say dogs have to be on leash with the exception of designated off-leash areas. We don't have any, so wouldn't change anything. Yeah, but we will.
If I may, through the chair, the intent of this is to take this in steps, as you know, that was the way the committee approached it. So this is the first step to clarify where dogs are allowed, which parks where dogs can be walked on leash. The next step in this process is to do a study, as Mr. Calderon was saying, to look at the parks as requested by the committee to figure out what the environmental impacts might be of having dogs both on leash and off leash in additional park spaces. And then the recommendation would come back to your commission to decide whether or not we want to add additional spaces or allow other parks and other spaces where dogs could be on leash or off leash. So what my recommendation would be for your consideration is to wait and add this language around being off leash when we have some specific spaces for your commission to consider. Right now, our rangers couldn't recommend any place for people to have their dogs off leash in the parks because that's simply not allowed at this point.
Through the chair, through the chair. So part of the reason we're doing this is because we accepted ownership for park properties that have historically allowed dogs. And continue to be available for dog recreation. So the question to me is, have those properties made a distinction between areas where you must have a dog on a leash, and do they have spaces where the dog could run freely? And then the other question is, what kind of signage pre-existed? Was there any other signage that, for instance, made the distinction that Neil is talking about, off-leash areas, non-off-leash areas, and so on and so forth?
So through the chair, Commissioner, currently, I'll address the signage question first, which is currently we have signage at our parks that specifies no dogs when no dogs are allowed, and we do have some areas that have no signage, so they're essentially Pillar Point Bluffs, for example, which are more silent on the matter. And so we will make sure that we install appropriate signage that explains to park users whether dogs are allowed or not. And so we will work on universal symbols so that regardless of where you're coming from or the language that you speak, you'll be able to understand through the signage what is allowed and what isn't allowed without having to know specifically what the ordinance says. Secondly, with regards to the parks that we currently have that allow dogs, that's one of the issues, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this, is because what our ordinance says is no dogs allowed at all. And so while, for example, in Pillar Point Bluffs, people are allowed to bring their dogs, the county's policy is silent on in what capacity. And so we need to make sure that we are being clear to the public on what is allowed and what isn't allowed in what parks and on what trails. I hope I answered that question.
Yes.
But people have historically been taking their dogs off leash in some out-of-the-way areas, in areas that were available to them before the Parks Department took over for many years, 25 years or so on the Pillar Point Bluffs, because that was kind of no man's land for a while. And if you have a dog, there's got to be some place where you can throw a tennis ball or a frisbee. And it's hard to imagine that there isn't some place that isn't environmentally sensitive that we could do that next to a parking lot or someplace. And I think that was the intention that was the intention of the dog committee, what we're really talking about is getting more strict about leash use in our parks areas. And it would be nice to have an alternative so that when you're talking with somebody about the importance of putting a leash on, that we could say, take your dog, 6 blocks down the road. Because it seems like it's getting harder and harder to find a place to throw a Frisbee for your dog. So I would suggest just putting something that says in the future that's our intention, because that was our intention on the committee. And then, so that's my suggestion, but except for one more thing, and that is on the violation. Thank you for doing this. We've needed this for a long time. We don't want rangers to have to go to court for every little thing. But part of me worries, as I understand that, correct me if I'm wrong, but this scaled up fines in violation 1, 2, 3, 4, 50, 100, 300, and 1,000 applies to all of the violations equally. So that if you had a 7-foot leash, for instance, you'd be subject to $50. But if you let your dog go down to a beach and attack a seal, is the maximum you could impose is $50?
Through the chair, I'll do my best to answer that. At that point, that's a violation, that's a federal violation. That automatically goes to Fish and Game, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and that is not one of the fee on the fee schedule. That is definitely, you're going to court.
That's big, but Fish and Game only has, I think, 2 fish and game wardens between San Francisco and Monterey, so they're hard to get in touch with. They're not always at the parks, and
We're in frequent contact with them. You would be amazed how closely we work together.
okay,
Yeah.
I know that it worked in that situation. I was just thinking that certain violations are worse than other violations.
Absolutely.
And, imposing this, enacting it will take some discretion on the part of the rangers. And I feel like the rangers are able to do that. But I don't want people to think that having a 7-foot leash is the same as, leaving dog poop on the trail or allowing your dog to harass wildlife. I think that's worse, and maybe that could even use you could have a 2-tier. You could have a minor and a major, or for a minor, you could just caution people. But the way the law is written, that everything is the same, and I was questioning that. But it'll depend on the discretion of the rangers. Yeah, so I guess that's it. I want to make sure that this doesn't tie the rangers' hands. If there's something going on that's, very inappropriate, and the most you can impose is a $50 fine.
And through the chair, Commissioner Merrilees, we definitely appreciate that. In fact, what this ordinance does, though, it unties the rangers' hands, and it actually gives them the ability to enforce the ordinance and the regulations and protect the natural resources. As I stated earlier, as of right now, any violation, which is any dog in the park, is a misdemeanor offense, which is leading to a situation where none of those are actually being carried through the process. And so there is no way for our rangers to enforce the ordinance as it is. What we're doing with this is bringing the ordinance into line with our practice and giving the rangers the ability necessary to enforce it and protect the resources and make sure that all park visitors and users are able to enjoy the system and have a safe experience, because we're balancing many different user types, and we want to make sure that our rangers have the ability to do what they need to do.
I would also suggest through the chair that the staff come back within 12 months, possibly 6 months, and report back to your commission on the number of type of violations that have been, violators have been cited, to give you a sense of how that's working.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I could just dovetail on one of Neil's concerns. say a person's dog is not licensed and the dog is not on a leash. Should it just be $50? Because
Yeah, we would have to, Commissioner, we would have to have that conversation. But a violation, if it would be the first violation, it would be $50. I don't think you can stack the violations, but I defer to council on that.
If I can, through the chair. First of all, let's really understand what we're looking for here. This is a tool for the rangers to be able to use, and the first thing that we try to do is educate for compliance. So clearly, the first contact, we would explain to the people, you know, if it is not licensed or on a leash, we would ask them to leash it up and to understand what the policy is. If a person chooses at that point to push the issue, then I would say it is up to the discretion of the ranger. That would be a first violation, and that would be the first fee. And in the case that you spoke about, Mr. Merrilies, anything that is sufficiently chasing wildlife, damaging resources, or a risk to patrons or anybody in the park, that goes to a different severity, and that's also the ranger's call. I hope did that explain it? We would like to educate first.
through the chair, because licensing a dog has a public health purpose to it. And so if a dog is not licensed, then you're exposing the general public, you know, to things that they should not be exposed to. So it seems to me, you know, the fact that a dog is not licensed should be taken to some extent very seriously, because we do not know whether the dog may be rabid.
I completely understand what you're saying, and I hope that at the point of the contact, when the ranger makes it, that they would educate the person that the dog would be removed at that point if it is not licensed. So, and after, if they did not, then I would see them receiving a citation, and then they would remove the dog.
I really appreciate through the chair. Sorry for cutting you off. I really appreciate your effort to do the education piece, you know, and to give it enough time. And I think that was going to be one of my questions. How long do you anticipate that educational phase to take? Is it a 1 year, 2 year time period, or?
Through the chair, Commissioner, I think we would have to assess the progress of the educational phase. So we have to look at how is it working? How are we re-engaging with the same people over and over again? How are we able to reach all the park users? So I think we really need to look at how effective it is being and who are we engaging with. So it'd be hard to give you a specific time frame, but we do want to make sure that it's enough time that we can reach all, you know, as many park users as possible to make sure that people are aware of the rules.
But through the chair, for planning purposes, you got to give it a time frame. You cannot leave it unlimited or not give it enough time. You got to have a sense as to, you know, how long you'd be doing the education piece.
So through the chair, I would suggest that our education period would be on an individual basis. Our first contact with someone who's not familiar with these regulations would be an education point, unless for some reason the dog was unlicensed and they would be asked to be removed from the park. If someone, after having been told about these regulations, continues to violate them knowingly, then that was when we would proceed with the next steps of enforcement.
Through the chair again, I think that perhaps one thing I'd like to suggest is there has to be some notification in the form of signage, you know, telling the general public that the county is in the process of amending this specific ordinance regarding dogs in recreational, in park areas, so that, you know, they know that, you know, something is happening. So when they have that interaction with the ranger, You know, they have a context. You know, they know that in the future things are going to change. The practice that they've had for the last 25 years is no longer going to be acceptable. You know, so I would suggest that very strongly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I want to try to move forward on this, and obviously, Mr. Calderon has come forward and has had a well thought out, and this was very well presented. I did have one question for Commissioner Maryles. In these amendments that you've advised and you've spoken in regards, and personally, I did not work on the on this dog issue, but do you think what you've presented and what you've spoken today, is that sufficient enough? And speaking through county staff, will that be sufficient enough to move forward to recommend to the future supervisors initiative?
I think I'm gonna defer to the discretion of the Parks Department and the staff. The one thing I really would like to put in it is, with the exception of designated off-leash areas, because I think we are going to do that. And the intention is to do that. And we could come back and do that later. It's just that this has taken so many years to get to this point, and I hope it doesn't take too many more years.
We don't want to fumble. We don't want to fumble at the 1 yard line. You know, to speak to sorry to speak that way, but I agree with you that this has been it's key and critical, and you've worked on it for a length of time.
I mean, it wouldn't change the ordinance at all because we don't have any designated off-leash areas. So it wouldn't change the enforcement, but it just, we would have it in the resolution. Do you think that can be done, or you think it can't be done?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of that.
Just put with the exception of designated off-leash areas, would that, why would that hurt? Since we don't have any designated off-leash areas, it wouldn't change enforcement or,
I'll let Director Jensen speak to that. We were just speaking about that issue.
Yeah. Through the chair, since we don't have any designated areas, it could be confusing to people that there might be some designated areas. So my preference would be, and I can commit to you that we will proceed as quickly as possible, but to come back to your commission at a future date with designated areas that could be considered, so we can say at the following designated areas, if that is something you want to go forward with. And we can commit to coming back to you, I don't know, what, within 6 months, 12? 6 months, yeah. About 6 months. But if you take action today, we can move forward with what we presently have and then bring that to the board later this month and get this process going.
okay. I think, yeah, let's get the commitment to move forward in that way and move forward on this whole process.
Through the chair, one more question relating to the report. So under fiscal impact, you indicate that there's really none. And so the question for me is that at some point you're going to be taking people to court. They're going to be fined, and you know there's going to be money. Is that money going to come to the Parks and Recreation Department, or is it going to go to the? Is it going to go somewhere else? And that's why you say there's no fiscal impact. At some point, there is going to be some fiscal impact, a positive one.
Through the chair, the fines, the money generated through the fines will be directed towards the department. The no fiscal impact statement is simply with just the amendment of the ordinance, not necessarily the implementation.
Okay.
With that being said, and since you and to our commissioners here today, and since you did a lot of work into it, can we? Is there a way to receive and propose forward and accept this proposal today?
We should listen to the public.
Yeah, need public comment.
Thank you so much to Mr. Calderon. Wonderful, key and critical points that you brought up, and I wish the best for this, and I hope it is placed forward in the supervisor's hands. on this subject, looks like at this point we do have two public speakers, and there are comments regarding these issues. I am going to call first off, the one I received now is Christine Corwin in the audience. Please come forward and speak on what you have. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. First off, I just want to thank the San Mateo County Park staff and the commissioners for taking up this important issue.
Can you speak your name?
Oh, sorry, Christine Corwin. For taking up this important issue of dog walking recreation in county parks. My name is Christine Corwin. I'm the president of Coastside Dog of San Mateo County. We're an all-volunteer nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting responsible dog walking and advocating for dog-friendly open space areas on the San Mateo County coast. And I had the pleasure of serving on the San Mateo County Parks Dog Management Committee. And as you know, the committee was composed of 10 members representing, sort of the key stakeholder groups for county parks. There were, representing environmentalists, equestrians, dog walkers, some community councils. And we met for about 14 months. And let's see, and we, through rigorous discussion, extensive public input and research, the committee worked to develop a set of policies around dog management, which your commission passed last December. So thank you for that. I'm very proud of the work of our committee and these policies. They're very equitable and balanced. We managed to reach consensus with a very diverse group of people, and I feel like that was a huge success on getting, helping county parks forge a positive pathway moving forward on this issue. So today, your commission is here to consider the next step, which is amending the county ordinance. And basically, we know the dog management policies can't be implemented until that ordinance is amended. So 2 days ago, the dog management committee members received a copy of the proposed ordinance language. We didn't get a chance to weigh in on it, unfortunately. It was the first time we'd seen it. And I hate to say this, but as a committee member and as the president of Coastside Dog, I'm going to have to oppose the ordinance language as it stands right now, unless some key changes are made. So basically, as it stands right now, I feel like some of the ordinance language does not reflect some of the intent and outcomes from the Dog Management Committee. We met for months. We discussed in depth. We filtered tons of public input through us. And, we feel like it's really important to listen to the public. And, I don't feel like there's been enough education around this ordinance change. But just, to bring up some specific points with the ordinance language. And I don't know, do you have a copy of the policies that were passed like back in December? I have extra copies with me. If anybody would like a copy.
If you have them,
Yeah.
we can take a look at them.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
this is the staff report from December 2017.
Oh, I remember. I think when you worked on this extensively.
So basically, I'm going to start with the new proposed ordinance language, with some of which Commissioner Merrilees has addressed. But if you look at the last page of the ordinance, which has all of the new text in red, right now it says, in any San Mateo County Park or Recreation area where dogs are allowed, no person shall cause or allow a dog under his control, blah, 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 to enter or remain. Basically, it's saying, I'm just going to summarize this. It's just saying that dogs have to be on leash in all county parks. We saw that in their recommendation. And I just want to point out that really flies in the face of what our committee has recommended and what the public has asked for. So on page 7 of the December 2017 staff report, forgive me, on page 4 of the staff report, The policy says to provide a variety of experiences in our county parks. And letter A says consider designated off-leash areas. If off-leash areas are to be provided, guidelines specific to off-leash use must be developed. So I would hate to see this pushed off. I mean, this has been a long time coming. Not to mention the taxpayer dollars that it costs to, go through this process again, to amend the ordinance again. So we don't think that there's any harm in adding language around, potential future off-leash sites if such should be designated. And I feel like there's a way you can word it so that it's clear that we don't have any right now, but that is something that we will be considering as part of the implementation and as recommended by the Dog Management Committee. So the second item I want to go over, and again, this is something, fairly small, but it just, this was a recommendation from the Management Committee, is the leash length. So it says dogs are at all times are to be on leash, basically like a leash that's 6 feet in length. And I just want to point out that on page, 8 of the dog management policies, the staff recommendation, the actual language that we proposed, and we went over this for so long. I mean, this was not an easy thing to come to. It says leashes. Dogs must be leashed at all times unless otherwise posted. Again, getting back to the off-leash. And all leashes must be no longer than 6 feet when encountering others on trails. The reality is, some people like to use retractable leashes. And, to give their dogs a little space to kind of like sniff around and not just be glued to you 24/7 when you're out walking. Especially on the wider trails, which, a lot of our county parks trails, especially like Pillar Point Bluffs, Quarry Park, there's no harm in that. So I wanted to just mention that discrepancy. And then the last thing I want to mention, which Commissioner Merrilees did mention, are the enforcements. Like, as was brought up, I mean, people have been walking off leash at places like Pillar Point Bluffs and Quarry Park before the county took them over. Culturally, this is going to be a shock to the system. And so in that way, I am glad that there are going to be opportunities to consider some off leash, because we need it in San Mateo County. We have the strictest leash laws, I would almost venture to say, in California. I mean, if you go to San Francisco, if you go to Marin, if you go to the East Bay, tons of trails and fire roads where you can have your dog under voice control. Congresswoman Jackie Speer has been calling for designated off-leash spaces on federal land within our county. She has recognized that this is something that residents need here. So anyway, back to enforcement. I feel like more thought needs to be put into enforcement and into education. I think that the first citation should be a warning. I mean, how are people going to know if you've warned people? Like, say a different ranger is on duty that day. I mean, so I feel like the first one should be a warning. And then also, I don't think it should be a misdemeanor to have your dog just off leash. I mean, if your dog isn't doing anything, like right now it reads that it's punishable by more than $1,000 per violation or imprisonment in the county jail for a period not exceeding 6 months. I mean, we should not be talking about prison time for something. I feel like this is in bad faith. So anyway, that's what I'm going to say. I think, this has been a long time coming. We have a tremendous opportunity to do this right. I don't think it should be rushed. I think we should get it right before it goes to the Board of Supervisors. And I really don't want our group to have to come out and oppose this in the next month. Anyway, I really want to be able to support it, and I hope we can make a couple changes to the language that really respect the time and public input that went into the policy development process.
Ms. Corwin, thanks for coming and giving your side and presentation. And I hope that the coalition and your committee and the agenda that you're alongside with does well and continued success in what you're doing.
Well, and just, I feel like this is successful for parks doing this. It's a new constituency, and, you know, that's what we want. So thank you very much, unless anybody has any questions. Okay.
We do have another public comment in this regard, and I'm going to call up a resident in San Mateo County, and it's going to be Betsy Caffel. If you want to come forward and speak on this on our agenda.
Through the chair, if I might be able to respond first, just to provide
Absolutely.
some additional information. I think it's important that it's clear that this is being done in two phases. The first phase is bringing our ordinance into making our ordinance and our practice consistent, and that's what this amendment is doing. It's taking what we allow, and it's having an ordinance that supports that. And I think it's important that the ordinance reflects what is being allowed, not what is being discussed or what may be allowed or what could be considered down the road. I think you need to have an ordinance that discusses what is occurring and what you want to actually have happen. And so the second part, so that's the first part. The second part is the pilot program. And the Dog Management Committee developed and made a recommendation to the Parks Commission, and the Parks Commission adopted the recommendation for these policies and guidelines that are to be used to develop a pilot program. That pilot program would then inform the department and the commission in adopting departmental procedures and policies for how dogs can recreate in parks. I think a lot of the prior points made are issues that really need to be considered during the development of the pilot program. And that way, during the pilot program, they can be assessed. We can understand what is the impact that is being had on our natural resources, what are the impacts that are being had on park users, what is the impact from a financial perspective to the department. And so during the pilot program, which will be developed in coordination with the Dog Management Committee, which will be developed using the adopted recommendations that were developed by the Dog Management Committee, that is the appropriate time to look at these matters and identify what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed, where should certain activities be allowed. So right now we're just focusing on this first phase, or this first part, and I think these conversations are really important to have, that we're having during that second part, so that we can develop a robust, informed pilot program that included the community engagement and the information we've received from the public to date.
So I have obviously this is very near and dear to a lot of people, and this is a critical point in where we are in the commissioners spending a lot of time, and the folks that have public comments have sat and thought this over, not just overnight. It's been a very long process. So, Mr. Calderon and to county staff, how quickly do you think this is going to be passed on to, Supervisors Pine and Canepa and Carol Groom, and how quickly is this going to be? Because this is doesn't sound like it's going to get resolved instantly. Sounds like it's taken more time than, we want the best for everyone, whether people like it or not, oppose or not. I mean, people have worked tirelessly on this. How quickly do you see this getting to chambers for the next supervisors meeting?
So, through the chair, our plan is to bring the first step in what Mr. Calderon has said is a multi-step process that we're committed to moving forward. That first step, with your recommendation today, would be to go to the Board of Supervisors on October 23rd. That is a first reading. We would have the second reading on November 6th, and with confirmation by council, it would become effective 30 days.
That's correct.
30 days later. So that would be the first step in the process. The other thing that we have committed to do today with Superintendent Lombardi is to come back within 6 months with some recommendations in the areas where dogs would be allowed on this initial step in this process, where there would be recommendations about potential places where they could be off-leash. That's starting the larger process. If in fact you choose not to take the recommendation today, we would not be able to come forward to the Board of Supervisors until after the first of the year.
Okay.
Through the chair, do we want to go through all the public comments first before we reopen it up for?
I want to hear what Ms. Caffel has to say before we can continue on amongst our platform here and whether we choose to pass this on in recommendation to our supervisors.
Hi, I'm Betsy Caffell, and I live in Moss Beach. And thank you for all of the committee members for letting me speak. I live 2 blocks away from the Pillow Point Bluff Top, and I've lived in Moss Beach for 28 years. So I've really seen a transition of being a pretty wild open space area where kids would take their 4-wheel drives and go dune buggying and tearing up the turf out there, to being taken over by, I believe it was Post, and then San Mateo County taking over the park. And so, and I walk that park every day, sometimes twice a day. And it is such a part of my community. There's a group of us that various people that come together and we socialize, and it's really an important park for our community. And I feel really blessed to have that literally in my backyard. And I feel that it's sad when I look at people who are on this side of the hills, away from the coast, and they don't have access close by to public, parks to walk their dogs. So it would really be wonderful to open up more of the county parks available for dog walkers. But like I said, the coastal bluffs is such a treasure. Quarry Park is a treasure, and the fact that we have been walking our dogs there for many, many years off leash, on leash, but we're also a very conscientious group. We're very considerate of all people that use the park, because frankly, the parks are for everyone. But a majority of the people that use these Quarry Park and the Blufftop parks are dog walkers. And then I would say walkers, and then bicyclists and joggers. And I know we want to have rules about the dog walking restrictions, but we also have problems with bicyclists. Many times we're dealing with bicyclists coming up behind us and not giving us notice, and luckily we haven't had any collisions that I'm aware of. But it's a park that has to be used by all people. But for me, I would really like to see, areas of the park left open for off-leash. And let's see, there was something else I wanted to. And I'm also concerned about the language of the severity of the $1,000 fine and the misdemeanor. I think that's pretty extreme, and I think I understand why that happened, because we had an incident that happened months ago where someone's dog went down into Ross Cove Beach and killed a seal, and I feel like that was one person who made a very unfortunate decision, but the majority of us really respect the treasure that we have in it. And so I just really want you to consider the severity of the penalties that you want to enforce. The $1,000 fine and the jail time, I think, is pretty severe. I mean, I can understand with, when you're going into the area that is, I believe it's a federally protected area from Monterey up through San Francisco, because it wasn't always that way. And but when it changed, I didn't take my dog down to Ross Cove anymore. But I just really want you to take the time to think about the severity of the penalties, and then allowing other parks on the peninsula to open up to people, because we do get a lot of people that come over 92 to utilize the coastside parks. and to allow off-leash areas. So, you know, it's something that we've been doing for many, many years in our community. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you.
All right.
So with that, any other comments? Anyone else from the public have anything to come forward and speak? Please come forward before we move on to the next agenda. Come forward.
I'm Faye Brophy, and I was also on the committee for the Dog Management Committee.
Please speak into the microphone.
Oh, I hate public speaking. Okay. Okay. The reason why I'm coming up here is a couple of reasons. I was on there as a representative for the equestrians. I am a retired small animal dog veterinarian. I know nothing to take care of horses. But since I retired, I got into horses. And so I think what Christine talked about, because I now have a small dog who's very energetic, and yes, the flexi leash, I think is something that should be put into the language. But I would like to state a little bit more than Christine is that if you come up not only with people, well, I guess, okay, but other animals too. I guess the animals should be attached to the people, so maybe that's redundant. But anyway, I'm just trying to protect equestrians on that point. That dogs should be 6 feet. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into places which have been mixed. The dog is leaping, and the person is saying, he's friendly, and he's friendly. And I know and can read dog language, and I'm going, no, he's not, but okay, he's afraid, and we don't know what a dog who's afraid can do. So, but I do like the fact of the flexi leash. I personally use it, and I think they're great, okay? The other point that there's been reference to is the fines. And I personally feel that the fines are fair. I think when you have 4 violations in 12 months, in my opinion, that is a person who is either too lazy to read the rules, okay, or thinks that the fines are no big deal and I'll continue to break the fines. So I personally feel that the fines are justified, and I personally was glad to see that they were serious, because I think that there are people, understandably, who not only don't want the dogs in here, but are truly afraid of dogs, especially with all the publicity that's been going on about not only germs, which I don't agree with, but bites and things like that. So I personally think that the fines are justified, and I think they're reasonable. But I do want to say that the committee did work very hard for basically a year and a half, and I think that there is some language that does have to be changed. I think that the fact of not stating that there will be future off-dog leash areas will incite a lot of negativeness, is all I can say. And as Christine pointed out, and Niels has pointed out, if we don't have any, that's fine, but at least we are, or the parks is thinking about that as a justifiable position to hold if there are off-leash areas. That's it. Thank you.
Faye, thank you for coming forward. I think that's about it. I don't know should we, anyone in the audience have anything else to say? If not, we are going to move forward and see what the commission says, whether we want to bring this forward to a step one platform to the supervisors by the October 23rd meeting as Director Ms. Jensen brought forth.
To the chair, I think we can start to make
Start
a
the
proposal
process.
to adopt a resolution
Yes.
to initially approve today, as mentioned by the commission and the park staff. The bottom line now is that the first step, or the first option is to start doing approval. And upon approval, we have to submit this on October 23rd for review to the Board of Supervisors. Is that correct? And then up to November 6th and up to 30 days. And then, as what the superintendent said, that we have to wait for 6 months' time to adopt the resolution.
So I think what's at stake, and let's be practical here, can this present commission move forward with trying to resolve something to bring forward to the supervisors on the 23rd of October? Do we have anything in unison?
Well, let me throw something out. I want to get this process going, and I know that we have to amend this resolution, which has been, it's been wrong in terms of what we do in the county for a while, and we need to change it. We need to change it in an expedited manner. I would suggest the possibility of approving it and then putting a comment, forwarding a comment to the Board of Supervisors about adding the exception of designated off-leash areas. Not just approve it exactly as it is, with a comment saying, we approve this, we want to move this forward, but we were thinking that maybe something like this could be added.
To be clear, the commission could amend the ordinance now if it wished and send that to the board.
How are people feeling? Would you like to do it as a comment, or would you like to amend the ordinance?
As is.
Through the chair, I'd like to make some other comments, and then I'll address the issue. I think we had a dog committee established, and there are 10 individuals that expended a lot of time to get us to this point. And I think it should be important to us that some of the language that they expected to be in here should be in here. And this should not move forward until, that language is in there. And the specific language that we're talking about, we have those retractable dog leashes. That's the new technology, right? And what's being suggested as a 6-foot dog leash, I mean, that's 25 years ago, you had a dog leash that, could not extend and so on and so forth. And so we need to amend the appropriate areas in the ordinance that reflects the existence, one, of retractable dog leashes, and also reflects the fact that, there are animals, and there are horses specifically, that share trails, and so if we're going to talk about human beings, we should also talk about, in the ordinance, that you should retract when a horse with a rider approaches, or something like that. So that's one. Then the second thing is the issue that the public brought up about the severity of the punishment. And I think that's something that I think we need to discuss again. I mean, do we believe that this is good? I mean, this is not too severe. This is acceptable. Do we disagree with a member of the public that thinks that the punishment is a little bit too harsh, and so on and so forth? So I think the commissioner needs to spend a little time, delving into that as well. But I think the retractable leash language needs to be acknowledged. in the ordinance.
I think our youth commissioner, and thank you, thank you, Commissioner Oketa, for that. And we'll see if we can maybe make a few adjustments. But let me turn to our youth commissioner that has been anxious to speak up.
Through the chair, I just want to speak about the severity of the punishments. So, based on what I'm seeing here, it seems that like each there are like multiple rules here, and that each rule is subject to the same punishment. But I feel that some of these rules are more severe than others, and I thought like the reason that we wanted to amend this was because of the seal that was attacked, and I thought especially for that rule we should have more severe punishment for such a rule rather than having all rules subject to the same punishments.
Thank you. So we're quite behind, and I want to get to our executive director's foundation. But before I even get to that, can we at least get to something agreeable that we can pass on, or do we go back to what Commissioner Okello said? Are there certain things that we really need to push out or amend or revisit before, or are we content with some of this? I mean, what do you?
Chair, I think everything has been said.
Absolutely.
Everything has been discussed. Everything has been answered. Most especially Commissioner Meda, Commissioner Meriles. This has been already discussed. The main point right now, when we bring it back to the park superintendents, superintendent, and to the directors, park department, I think they can review, isn't it? Because you can see we have 6 months to approve this one, and there's more amendments within this first option to discuss and recommendation, October 23rd, November 6th, and 30 days. But Commissioner, the bottom right now is to be able to approve this resolution, and that's about it. There's any comments or anything that has to be added or anything, this is the thing that I think the staff will provide, right? Thank you.
Through the chair, I think district councilors had advised us that we can amend this ordinance. We have the authority to amend this ordinance. And this is the opportunity that we do have to amend the ordinance. So we can indeed change the language that's in the ordinance to reflect the things that we think need to be put in there. So when you talk about off-leash dog spaces, if you want it in there, let's put it in there, in the ordinance, not as a separate item. Let's put it in there in the ordinance. And if you want to rephrase the language about the length of the leash and so on and so forth to reflect this retractable leashes and so on and so forth, we can also put that in there. And so that's what we sent to the Board of Supervisors.
So just to be clear, you have 3 options as I see it at this point. One is to move and approve the ordinance as it's currently drafted. 2 would be to amend it and approve that amended ordinance. And 3rd would be to send it back to staff for adjustments in commensurate with what we've discussed here today. However, that obviously would involve significant delay.
I don't want it to go back to the drawing board. I really don't.
Let me propose a way of moving forward, and that is to add language that says retractable leashes are okay. Pretty much the same language that's on page 8 of our proposal. Leashes that can retract up to 6 feet when passing other dogs. Isn't that the language that we used? Or I can't remember, but we discussed the length of leashes for a long time. And this is going to be a test. And if it doesn't work, Parks staff will tell us, and we can amend it. So let's put the same language in that was discussed. Let's add except designated off-leash areas for now. into the 368180C. So dogs have to be on leash at all times in county parks unless they're in a designated off-leash area. So that way we can get started on a pilot project to try that out too. So we don't have to come back and wait another couple of years. The Board of Supervisors can take these out, of course, but I think that's kind of how we're feeling, or at least that's how I'm feeling. And I'd like to move that we accept the change the resolutions with 2 minor modifications that have to do with retractable leashes and designated off-leash areas. In terms of the fines, I think I'm willing to defer to Scott and his judgment and deference in terms of enforcing those, and we'll see how that works. And you can keep us apprised of what's going on there.
Sure, I think that's a good way to look at it. Let's just see if education through using those tools, hopefully we all wish that we don't have to go to the extreme and people are compliant. And I agree, let's just see how it goes.
Through the chair.
Just for 1 minute, seeing that spoken and through Director Peggy and through council, I am leaning, and we will take a motion here to option 2 and move this forward to our county supervisors with those minor amendments.
Okay, there's been a motion, so there needs to be a second for the motion.
I think Commissioner Mehta had one small question before we move with that.
I think there may have been a suggestion. Perhaps I got it wrong, but there may have been a suggestion in the violation provisions section. The first one really should be a warning, a citation that's just a warning, as part of the educational process. So the first thing is a warning that you get in the form of a warning citation. Then the second one would be $50 for a second violation, essentially, within a year. And the rest remain the same. But the very first, since our intent is really to educate the public, it does make sense that the first time around, we just give them a warning citation. So I'd like to include that as well. In the
Warning
changes.
instead of $100.
I'll modify my motion to include that.
Okay.
So with 3 minor changes: retractable leashes, first warning, and except designated off-leash areas.
And then I'll second that motion.
And so it's been presented and asked by our commissioners to our director and our county boards. A motion has been made. Do we have any questions? Would anyone like to second the motion on the contingent of those minor adjustments that we have this pass and move forward to our county supervisors?
I believe Commissioner Okello did second the motion.
I
Is that correct?
second the motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Congratulations, at least on the first step. It looks like we're in business. Thank you so much for your patience. And we are way behind, and we want to move forward to our next minutes of the agenda, and that is to introduce our wonderful Parks Foundation Executive Director, Michelle Beasley. Please come forward. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Commissioners, Vice Chair Manna, Michelle Beasley with the San Mateo County Parks Foundation. It's been a couple months since I have spoken to you. It was a busy summer of events. We had our second season of Coyote Nights at Coyote Point, and attendance was up. Our most popular evening was Nature Inspires Art, when we had Rangers Laurel and Catherine lead a paint and sip activity. So that was a lot of fun. We hope to do it again next summer. And the summer of events culminated with the Parks Foundation celebrating 20 years. On September 9th at Huddart Park, we were honoring 3 women who were very instrumental in launching the Parks Foundation. Of course, the founding executive director, Julia Bott, and then also Linda Liebes and Linda Dyson Weaver, who was chair of the Parks Commission many years ago. And it's also been really nice to have a new addition at our board meetings. Barbara Bonilla has been attending, and I think the pattern going forward is whoever is chair will come and report out to our board. So we very much appreciate that, and our next board meeting is next Thursday. In August, we made a gift to the county, and since I wasn't able to present in August, I just wanted to let you know that we made a gift that is supporting Bicycle Sunday, completing and improving Allenbeek Trail at Wonderlick Park. We also are working to complete trail signs at Coyote Point and Memorial Park this year. And then we've also provided funding for an outreach intern for the Parks Department. And we continue to fund bus transportation needs of schools and after-school programs. And we had a really nice partnership with Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, Star Vista, and Karen. It was a Spanish-speaking mothers group with their toddlers, and we worked with the Friends of Edgewood to have a Spanish language nature activity and walk. And that was very much well-attended, and they loved it, and they still talk about it. We have our hands in a couple different projects like Sanchez Adobe and the Ohlone Portola Heritage Trail, but we're very excited to partner with the Parks Department in gearing up for the 100th anniversary of the Parks Department, which is when Memorial Park became the first county park, and that will be 2024. So we're looking forward to doing some things, attacking some low-hanging fruit and maybe some bigger projects as we get closer to that. So stay tuned for more, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any for me. Thank you.
First off, I did want to reach out to you and thank you for inviting me, and it was a great pleasure to be at such a wonderful, amazing setting in a warm Woodside afternoon. So thank you again for having me at the 20th anniversary and meeting Mr. Doug McConnell and the folks from the Parks Endowment and the community. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming, and also thank you to Chair Barbara Bonilla for attending also. It was really nice to have you all there. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Beasley, for your report. Next on the agenda is our department report, and I am going to extend welcome and good evening to Scott Lombardi, our park superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair. If you have any questions about the superintendent report, I'll be glad to answer them. I have a quick PowerPoint up here right now of just kind of some fun events that have been occurring in our park system and some work that's been going on, so we can just kind of roll through them. We've been very busy this time of year. We're preparing for winter time. This is a time that we get a lot of our hazard trees, a lot of our culverts and drainages fixed, but we've also keep up with our events. As you can see, we've got Take a Kid Fishing at Coyote with the Rangers. It's a really positive program. Kids love this. Hopefully on the days that they go out there, they do hook up with some fish. Sometimes they catch a stingray, which is quite entertaining. Let's see, what else we got here? We've got Crystal Springs Dam project meeting. That's going to be coming up pretty soon. We should be having an opening day, hopefully in the end of October, beginning November. Some improvements we've done at Coyote Point, at the Pergola. So Take a Hike, which is so popular that I'm sure all of you know about. This has been going, is it 6 or 7 years now, I think, for Take a Hike. So it's really, that program has really blown up. We have the Art Night, Coyote Nights Art Night. We have another hike at Quarry Park. That's kind of the rock maze. It's on the quarry floor. San Pedro Valley Junior Ranger Program. That's run by Catherine. She does a great job with that. She also had that at Fitzgerald Marine Reserve also this year. And And I think the one I missed in there was movie night. That's always a big one with everybody. That was at Coyote Point. That was a good one. So if you have any questions on the superintendent report, I'll be glad to answer them for you.
Through the chair, and this is probably not to you. I think this is probably to Ramona. On the back of the report, there's some acronyms that I'm not good at remembering acronyms. So there's TAH, there's JSP, and there's SPV. I mean, I like to have them really spelled out because.
We will spell them out in the future.
Right,
I think
Yeah.
TAH is, I figured out, take a hike.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
We will spell those out in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll be helpful.
Like to hear from next from our Parks Director, Ms. Peggy Jensen. Thank you for this evening.
So item number 7.2 on your agenda this evening is the summary of the fiscal year 17-18 budget. You have in your agenda packet a summary that was presented by or developed by our Financial Services Director, Rolando Decara. Also included in your packet is the performance presentation that I presented to the board earlier this week. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any
Through the chair, I didn't know you were thinking of tiny housing for rangers. That was,
Well, yes, I actually wear many hats with the county, and one of them is working on housing issues, and we have a significant initiative around second units. And when I learned that there's been significant turnover, particularly among our entry-level rangers, I spoke with staff, and Mr. Lombardi felt that it might be a good opportunity for us to look at housing for additional housing in the parks. There's no funding for that project, but what I can tell you is that there seemed to be significant interest by the Board of Supervisors. So we'll put together a proposal and we'll let you know how it goes.
and do you have a location, or would it be spread out, or?
Currently, I have 5 locations right now.
Okay. I commend this. This is thinking out of the box, and I think, we got to
Thank you.
try everything, yeah.
Thank Director Jensen bringing it up.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
This is a wow. You get a wow for this. Commissioners' reports. 8.1 on the agenda here is a commissioner's work plan report, and we are going to turn to item 8.1, which is a commissioner's plan report. Commissioner Okello will give this report to the commission. Commissioner Okello, thank you.
In the work plan that the commission adopted, the subcommittee that was created that was supposed to look into increasing the visibility of parks in the county. And Vice Chair Monet and myself are members of that subcommittee. And we met several times, and we met with staff as well. And we came up with some suggestions, so we came up with a list of questions that we wanted to pose to the Parks Department. And I'm extremely happy that attached to that report some answers to those questions. And so we asked to get a report on the following recommendations from the visitor study at the next Parks Commission meeting, and we got the report. And it was really a series of questions, how many bilingual staff, because the visitor study was very clear in terms of the utilization of county parks. And there were certain populations in the county that were not utilizing the parks to the same extent that, to the extent that we would have loved them to do. And the visitor study also speculated as to what the reasons may be, and one was certainly language barrier. And so that generated a lot of questions from the committee, from the subcommittee. And so we asked the question how many bilingual staff we have or have been hired since the study was accomplished. Has the county and the department incorporated cultural competency trainings for existing staff? Has translation of park literature and signage into multiple languages been started? Are park rangers participating in community events, particularly in communities that the study identified as not using parks to the extent that we would like them to use? The final question was, with the pending termination of the park shuttle program, what was being considered as a replacement? And some of these questions are very germane to what we're getting ready to do in terms of the educational program that we're getting ready to implement regarding dogs in parks. If we don't understand the language, there are people that we may not be able to communicate with, or we may not be able to communicate with them appropriately culturally. So these questions are certainly germane to some of the things that we're getting ready to do. And so I reviewed your answers, and I absolutely don't have any problem with them. I think they're very satisfactory answers. And just due to time, I'll just quickly go through them. How many bilingual staff have been hired since the study? Parks does not have any data on language skills of recently hired staff, but we do know that our staff includes people from a variety of ethnicities and language backgrounds, and 5 positions currently receive bilingual pay. We are researching bilingual pay options and will report back to the Commission in early 2019. And then question number 2, has the county and the department incorporated cultural competency trainings for existing staff? And the response is no, but the department will incorporate cultural competency training into our training programs starting in 2019. The department intends to utilize existing county trainings, including potentially both online and in-person classes. A cultural competency module will also be added to the new hire orientation that all rangers are required to complete when they join the department. When the plan for this training is complete, staff is going to report back to the Commission. Has translation of park literature and signage into multiple languages been started? And the answer to that is yes. The department has started translating park-specific brochures into Spanish and will soon start translation of these brochures into Chinese. Spanish and Chinese were the 2 languages identified as the most needed in the study. We expect to have all 15 informational brochures translated and distributed by the end of 2019. I think the department is doing great work in that regard and answering those specific concerns. And question number 4, are park rangers participating in community events, particularly in communities that the study identifies as not using parks? And the answer to that is yes. It's estimated that in 2018, staff will engage with 2,000 community members through 27 different events within communities identified as not using parks. In particular, these events have taken place in Junipero Serra Park and the San Bruno Mountain in North County, in Memorial Park, San McDonald Park, and Flood Park in South County, and at Coyote Point recreation area. And staff has also participated in educational events at the Menlo Park Library, John F. Kennedy Elementary School in Daly City, and at the East Palo Alto Library, South County Clinic in Fair Oaks, and the North Fair Oaks Library. So I think those are, that's a pretty good effort. And finally, question number 5, with the pending termination of the Park Shuttle program, what is being considered as a replacement? To provide continued access to the parks for North Fair Oaks and East Palo Alto residents, the department is working with community groups to schedule park visits and arrange transportation whenever it's needed. The department is also researching additional ways to address transportation for non-traditional parks visitors, and will share the results of that research with the Commission. And finally, to further inform the Parks Commission on this matter, the December Parks Commission meeting agenda will include a study session focused specifically on strategies to to engage with this population. I think that's an absolutely phenomenal proposition. The study session will include presentations from subject matter experts and other park agencies who are attempting to increase the diversity of their visitors. So I think if I can speak on behalf of the subcommittee, I think the department is doing exactly, what we do believe it should be doing. So thank you.
As Commissioner Marylis had his committee with the dogs and spend a thorough amount of time, Commissioner Mehta and I did spend quite a bit of time on this issue, attending other workshops and attending youth commissions. Our youth commissioner was in attendance. Supervisor Carol Groom held something. So we've been exchanging messages, and we sat down and off-site venues because this is obviously something that we need to. We're obviously our purpose as commissioners. One of the things is to increase park awareness. To say, hey, parks actually do exist, and we want people of all colors, all traditions, all ages, all demographics, nationalities to say, hey, these parks are amazing. They're doing a great job. Park rangers are doing a great job keeping us safe, and we want to bring our families here for picnics and all the parks amongst the county. So this was well thought out, and I really want to extend a warm thank you to Commissioner Okello for putting this together. Thank you again. And next, if we can move on to 8.2 and discuss the department's response to the Commissioner's Work Plan project.
I think that's been already addressed through Commissioner Okello.
Okay, okay. And items for future agenda. Item 9.1, non-traditional park user study session. For the next meeting agenda is a non-traditional park user study session. Any items that any of our respective commissioners from today's meeting, if you'd like to see put forth on the December meeting. Start with Chairman Enriquez.
Do we have to have the commissioner's work plan report today, or do we have to proceed that to the next agenda?
I would elect that we can have that for the December meeting.
What I'm saying right now is that what we hear from Commissioner Meda is the one that he put as part of the work plan, but the rest of the work plan on 1.3, 1.1, 1.3.
Right, it's something that we worked on collectively.
So do we have to, because I have reports also that I have to either report today or postpone today and put another agenda.
You know what? If you have them today, go ahead and proceed with them.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank each and every one of you, my fellow commissioners and the staff of the park. I was out for almost 14 days. I was hospitalized. And due to the fact that I'm recovering right now, but still under treatment. And thank you very much, and the park staff. Well, first of all, I studied this for almost months already, and I almost forget all those things that I already written based upon the research that I did for the past how many months. Well, the develop 1.3 is to develop parkland acquisition policies to help guide future acquisition of park properties. And the 1.3.1 is the form committee to develop a plan for preparing these policies, which could include surveying other agencies to gather examples, evaluating their advantages and disadvantages. Well, based on the commission adopted during the meeting of October 5, 2017, the item said 7.4 discuss and approve commissioner assignments to commission work plan. On this work plan procedures, I researched that talking to some other old and based upon the projects that the park staff has been for almost 20 years, and to the best of my knowledge, San Mateo County Parks and Recreation Department does not have any specific or direct policy and specific procedures regarding this plan work procedures as of to date. And based on these meetings that I have from the senior staff, in fact, to the planning and to some other park, and even I went to some other coastal parks department that and some north side that acquire either coastal or transferred lands or acquisition by park staff. Going to this area, I was told that there is no such thing as a direct acquisition at all. And based upon my, to the best of my knowledge, that I put this number one as the proposed land acquisition policy is not a general policy, but a guidelines only on a case-to-case basis. It also depends on a project-to-project basis, right? And upon this discussion to some other park staff, this was a basis of what I studied, that I think in order to be able to acquire something, I think we have to
So
adopt
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Are you suggesting, Commissioner, that this should be agendized for a future agenda?
No, this is an addition to what the work plan procedure that we discussed a long time ago.
Yeah, so is this part of agenda item 8.1?
I think so.
Okay. I just want to make sure that it's adequately part of the agenda.
Well, it's not written here in the agenda because I was out. I was out last meeting.
Right. So just for my own understanding, are you just reporting back on something?
This is a reporting today
Uh-huh.
to be able to finish what I have
Okay.
written.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're almost done. The proposed land acquisition policy is not general policy, but a guidelines only. And a case-to-case basis. It also depends on a project-to-project basis. So when we have some sort of a acquisition or any other transferring or any item that we have to buy or acquire, I think we have to have. There's no such thing as policy. There's no such thing as general policy by the Department of Parks. So, but it depends upon our own decision by the Commission and the Park Department. So, I suggest that we have to create a committee to study and analyze the proposed project on a case-to-case basis if we will have some sort of a acquisition project at all. The committee will provide a recommendation and planning on this project and acquiring land acquisition. The committee members will be the following: maybe one commission from our department, one commission from the commission, one for the park staff, and one for either or as needed for the public. And then we'll have some sort of provide public forums, outreach programs, and public comments. If in case there's a pandemic or all, I think that's part of the additional agenda that we have to discuss in the future. Then after that, we have to set aside the approval by the commission and the park staff and direct the directors of park for approval and then to San Mateo County Park Supervisor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I would suggest that in the February agenda we include a copy of that report, and perhaps we also need to probably just include a discussion on just the general work plan.
Yeah, we did that already before, but
Right.
not this one.
I want it to be part of the record so that we can include your written report there, because as part of our meeting, and it would be incorporated in part of the work plan discussion.
Okay.
Portion of the agenda.
Any other commissioners have any addendums or any adages in regards to the committee reports that have worked on? Commissioner Marylis?
I went to a couple Ohlone Portola Trail community meetings, which went well. Got lots of good input.
Youth Commissioner, any, you have any interest, or you? Trying to recruit some youth commissions, maybe? Just one on this 5.1. Chair Bonilla and I are trying to improve our relationship with the Arts Commission and other commissions and endowments, along with parks within San Mateo County. So I believe we've done that throughout the course of the 2018 year, and hopefully we continue to increase awareness and visibility at those meetings. If no other commissioner or staff doesn't have much else to report on at this moment, 6:10 Thursday evening, October 4th, I would like to adjourn the meeting.
A motion to adjourn?
Second.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you for everyone's attendance. Have a wonderful night.